Act 1, Scene 3. Here Shakespeare introduces the witches properly, and he goes completely over the top with it. It's meant to be absurd and funny as well as dark. Remember, Shakespeare wrote this play just after King James had succeeded Queen Elizabeth to the throne. And King James was notoriously both terrified of and obsessed with the occult, and with witches particularly. This play really revels in that. Probably an economic decision as well for Shakespeare, since you could make good money for your theatre company if the king chose your play for private performance in the court. The witches spend the opening to this scene talking with relish about all the mischief they have gotten up to since we saw them last. The first witch has been killing swine, presumably the equivalent of taking out the garbage for one of these crew, although it is an important metaphor for the occult, due to the fact that swine are regarded as unclean animals in the Bible, unlike lambs, and their slaughter is therefore symbolic of pagan worship. But the second witch has a truly bizarre story of mischief to share, beginning with how she bumped into a sailor's wife, who refused to share with her a handful of chestnuts that she was eating. In response, the witch tells us how she plans to sail out to meet this woman's husband, and, as punishment, to do things to him that his wife will certainly not approve of.
A sailor's wife had chestnuts in her lap, and munched, and munched, and munched. Give me, quoth I. Aroint the witch, a rump-fed ronyon cried. Her husband's to Aleppo gone, master of the tiger. But in a sieve I'll thither sail, and like a rat without a tail, I'll do, and I'll do.
Her two companions cackle with delight, and promise to cast spells to make the wind blow in a favourable direction as she travels to ambush this poor fellow in Aleppo. The second witch describes how she will drain this man, presumably by sexual intercourse forced upon him by some kind of dark magic, till he is a relic of his former self, unable to sleep or think.
Sleep shall never night nor day hang upon his penthouse lids. Weary 7 nights 9 times 9 shall he dwindle, peak and pine.
The witch's over-the-top reaction to what is, in the end, a fairly small slight is meant to be darkly funny, but it also has some important elements of foreshadowing, in that it echoes in various ways several key themes that will emerge as we travel deeper into the play. What is significant initially from the story is how, as a consequence of the witch's punishment, the male victim is made unable to sleep, and eventually wastes away or descends into madness. This forms a clear parallel with the witch's influence over Macbeth, since after he succumbs to their suggestion and murders the king, Macbeth finds himself unable to sleep. Sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep, cries a mysterious voice on the night of the murder. Thereafter, both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are tormented by insomnia, just like the man in the witch's story. But equally significant is the sexual dimension of the story, particularly the way in which the second witch wields her sexuality as a means of controlling another male character. As we see in Lady Macbeth's tirade in Act 1, Scene 7, after Macbeth momentarily wavers in his conviction to murder the king, Lady Macbeth also wields her sexual power as a means of influencing her husband. The rhetorical techniques she uses to re-persuade him that they ought to kill Duncan are both closely connected to her sexuality. On the one hand, she contrasts her femininity with the fact that she is willing to commit the murder, and yet Macbeth himself is not, effectively saying that even though I'm a woman, I am more manly than you are.
When you durst do it, then you were a man. And to be more than what you were, you would be so much more of a man.
On the other hand, she references her fertility, or her lack thereof, when she implies that she is glad that their child perished anyway, if its father has proved to be such a coward as to back out of murdering Duncan.
I've given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from its boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this.
Just like the second witch, there is an extent to which Lady Macbeth wields her sexuality as a means of achieving her own ends, particularly to manipulate other male characters.
A drum! A drum!
The third witch hears a drum somewhere in the distance, and the other two immediately predict the entrance of Macbeth, who now wanders onto the scene accompanied by Banquo. They greet him, first as Thane of Glamis, his actual title, then as Thane of Cawdor, the title he does not yet know he has, and finally as he who shall become king hereafter. Macbeth seems confused but intrigued, but Banquo butts in, seemingly a bit offended that the witches have not addressed him. They tell him that he is lesser than Macbeth and greater, since although he shall never become king himself, he shall bear many kings as his descendants. Then Macbeth cuts in again and asks for more about him, and it is at this moment that a divide appears between the characters of Macbeth and Banquo that will only grow wider as the play goes on.
Stay, you imperfect speakers. Tell me more. About my father's death. I know I'm Thane of Glamis. But how of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives a prosperous gentleman, and to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you have this strange intelligence, and why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Speak! I charge you!
Although Macbeth says that he cannot conceive of how he might become Thane of Cawdor, and that to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, he is intrigued by the witches' predictions, mesmerized by them. Banquo, by contrast, seems to regard them as more of a joke.
Were such things here as we do speak about, or have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner?
Macbeth's interest in the witches, his desire to know more in contrast to Banquo, is expressed through two key techniques. On the one hand, there is a repetition of these imperative verbs tell, speak, and say, all in the space of a few lines, which, along with the other imperative, stay, shows that Macbeth is immediately entrammelled by these creatures. He wants them to remain, and to tell him more. But the heightened impact their words have on Macbeth, in contrast to Banquo, is also revealed through Shakespeare's use of stage directions, particularly the stage direction aside, which here conveys the fact that we are momentarily entering Macbeth's mind, hearing things that the other characters cannot. For the whole remainder of this scene, as Ross enters with an attendant and confirms the witch's pronouncement that Macbeth is Thane of Cawdor, to Banquo and Ross's joking exchanges towards the end of the scene, Macbeth all the while is intermittently spacing out, conveyed by this stage direction aside, his mind reeling with all the implications of what the witches have just said.
Come what? Come may. Time and the hour runs through the roughest today.
These mini soliloquies are a distinctive feature of this scene. Normally, soliloquies are longer and more sustained, but here they are fleeting, and are split up by the dialogue of other characters. Not only that, the other characters recognise that Macbeth is spacing out, where usually in Shakespeare's plays the other characters freeze during a soliloquy, as if time had momentarily stopped.
Look, our partner's rapt.
We see that Macbeth cannot stop thinking about what he has heard.
This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why has it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man that function is smothered in surmise. And nothing is but what is not.
He thinks of all the possibilities. Are the witches evil? Are they trying to harm him? But then how could they be, since what they told him was so good? And yet, how could he become king without the king's death? For it is not a title like Thane, which can simply be withdrawn or conferred at the behest of the monarch. And yet, to kill the king is an appalling thought. And Macbeth recognises how appalling it is. For interestingly, Macbeth's first use of the word murder in the play, right here, is not in reference to killing the king, but in reference to murdering the thought of killing him, this thought that has suddenly taken over his mind. As Macbeth himself realises, he tragically cannot even celebrate the achievement of having become Thane of Cawdor, since he can only compare it to the fact that he has not yet achieved the third of the witch's prophecies. He has not yet become king. Nothing is but what is not. This is a wonderful metaphor for the way desire seems to work in his heart. For although he has just grown hugely in power and majesty, the only thing he can think of is that which he does not have. This is the literary device of paradox, or a kind of juxtaposition, making the obviously contradictory statement that nothing exists, nothing is, except the things that are not, or the things that he does not yet have. Only those things, the things he lacks, are important or real to him in this frame of mind. But Banquo and Ross are waiting on him. His new title, Thane of Cawdor, is a more powerful title than theirs, higher up in the food chain of Thanes, and they stand now to follow his lead.